Welcome to Bet on the Web, an Ionic podcast. Join Matt Netkow and Mike Hartington as they discuss a variety of topics through the lens of the open web. The core Ionic team you know and love, as well as industry experts, will join them in covering important industry trends, sharing thought leadership, and debating the newest technology shaping the web platform landscape.
So, welcome everyone. This is a new venture that we're doing at Ionic. We're taking some time to relax a bit from the code and figure out what makes our community great, what makes our developers great, and highlight key players that we see in the field and awesome topics that we think are super interesting and think people are desperately needing answers for. So I'm Mike Hartington, developer and developer advocate for the Ionic framework. Today I am joined for our first episode by my coworker, Matt Netkow.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
Cool. So for those who do not know, Matt Netkow is I wouldn't say he's brand spanking new, but he's a relatively recent addition to the Ionic team. He focuses, I'll let you take that. Why don't you give us a little introduction, Matt?
Yeah, what do I focus on? Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I am excited to be a new part of our marketing team as a senior product evangelist. And what that means is really working on many different types of things. So, of course, our marketing efforts, but a lot of community outreach, heading to conferences, and working with our clients on the Ionic Pro platform and making sure that we deliver lots of great value and continue to build out the Ionic platform. Yeah. And really, really excited to join Ionic. I come from a really interesting background, having joining them, admittedly. I'm traditionally more of a .NET developer and more consulting focused. Been through a number of consulting types of roles, and really what excited me about this role is I've always straddled the line between being a really technical kind of focused developer, but as well as having those skills and getting involved with the business side of things and working with our customers and stuff like that. So when this particular role came up that involved in exactly those types of strengths, I was really excited to dive in. And I had always been aware of Ionic. I've personally put out several not Ionic apps, but in the similar types of space, the hybrid mobile apps myself, some of which that have done decently well out there in the App Store world. And those really where I got into that is starting to learn JavaScript all those years back. I had some app ideas and wanted to be able to, not invest my time in learning necessarily the native technologies that take a while to learn, especially as just a side project effort or even as a solo dev, right?
Right. I mean, it's one of those things where at one point, I really don't want to learn Objective-C. Every year it changes. Java's a whole thing. Kind of the web technology is like it's a safe bet, but it's also like something that you can definitely depend upon.
It is. And there's certainly, regardless of your skill level as a developer, at the end of the day, it's, especially with mobile, it's an entirely separate ecosystem. I came from, again, a background of .NET, Backend, integrations, APIs, things like that. So a really different world from even just designing software, right, and UIs compared to mobile, or lack thereof if you're doing a lot of automation without, any front end work. And that's it exactly. Is regardless of how much time you have or how much skill, there's always going to be a big investment moving to a different platform like mobile. So, and yes, go ahead.
No, continue.
No, and it's just there's significant time involved, and so what had started to happen is I realized, well, I had some app ideas. That's really exciting, about 5-10 years ago, as we got into this smartphone era and the possibilities of creating new experiences that could reach millions of people is just incredibly exciting and attractive, of course. So when I started looking at what was out there, it is a little disheartening to see, oh, for iOS, you might have Objective-C, Java for Android, and yes, they've extended onto other languages, and the tools have gotten better and better. But at the end of the day, that's to reach as many people on as many platforms as possible. It's a no small undertaking.
So let's dive back real quick, because you mentioned C# as a background when you first kind of got started, and that piqued my interest because I am not a C# dev. I have written maybe 2 or 3 lines of C# code, enough to know that it's not my cup of tea. What if you had to go back? Would you take that C#, because C# has Xamarin, right? It's obviously designated for C# developers, people who are comfortable in that ecosystem. Have you written stuff in using Xamarin before, and kind of what's your take on it, and what's kind of your thought process if you've ever used it?
Sure. Well, when I started, about 5 or 6 years ago, looking to hopefully identify a way to build mobile apps with technology I already knew, which was JavaScript on front end or more C# or .NET kind of technologies. I did actually look at Xamarin. Unfortunately, at the time, it was not free. It was not owned by Microsoft yet. And quite frankly, and this is not a, this was a common sentiment I saw from other developers as well. It seemed like the cost was a high barrier to entry for especially a lot of hobbyists like I would have been. Because again, I was not looking. This was not for my day job kind of thing that I wanted to do.
Right.
It was.
This is all like side projects and personal pet projects, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I did take a look at it because, of course, yes, it is for teams that are heavily focused on .NET. It does make sense to at least take a look, especially nowadays. As of, I think, what is it? A couple years ago, Microsoft bought them, and it's deeply integrated into Visual Studio and the Microsoft ecosystem, which is really cool, and totally makes sense for what the goals of that project are. But yeah, I had only really attended a workshop once on it, just kind of a Saturday session over at Microsoft, actually. And, it admittedly, maybe things have gotten better, but to be honest, the tooling wasn't that great. It was very challenging. It took us a lot of time just to get a simple app deployed. But so that, really at the time, though, it was the cost, which I think was many hundreds of dollars, if not thousands, for an individual single license, which again is not the case now. So I started looking at, I found PhoneGap, or Cordova, as you may have heard it called, which is Apache/Adobe's open source solution that leverages web technology, HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, and started going down that path since I was starting to pivot towards more front-end technology as it was coming up and becoming popular, especially JavaScript. And the rest is history.
I'm going to interrupt. So I do have a question there, because this is a really interesting point, because a lot of engineers that I've talked to in the past, when they all kind of ask about solutions, and you mention, oh, it's all web technologies, and they go, oh, so I have to learn JavaScript. Coming from a C# background, I've worked with C# devs who, as soon as they open up an editor, they hit method name, they hit that dot, and they're expecting this auto completion to kind of just pop up for free. And especially 5 years ago, we didn't have things like VS Code, or we didn't have TypeScript kind of providing all this IntelliSense. So this kind of JavaScript tooling that maybe C# developers are used to didn't really exist, or it wasn't as refined as what we're used to today. How did you find learning JavaScript, or kind of coming to the front end after being so long in the back end you were saying, and with such a very tooling heavy language?
Oh, that's a wonderful question, because honestly, it was extremely painful. Things have, because this was, again, I don't know, maybe 6 years or more that I started down the JavaScript path, and things have gotten so much better in terms of free content online, like YouTube or other videos that are out there, courses, free ebooks, and all types of things, as well as the browsers themselves, right? The developer console tools and things like that. So I actually started by like a lot of folks from that time, or even into from like the 90s, or really when a lot of other folks that got started with the web, with just kind of learning jQuery to start, since that was a little bit easier, at least when that's typically what I would see. And I was doing, what actually prompted it is, I was with the company I was working at the time. I was doing a lot of integrations with Salesforce, the very popular CRM, software as a service company. And a lot of that some of it was pulling my company's system data into Salesforce and needing to render it and style it, right? So there was a lot of CSS and JavaScript there. And to be honest, a lot of it was, again, very hacky, just trying to Google what little was out there and what constantly kept changing. And I remember using Firebug, which was the very first, before DevTools even existed, the developer console and tools, natively in browsers. Those didn't exist. And so you had third-party plugins like Firebug that could do basic element selecting and basic, CSS and HTML and JavaScript rendering and tweaking of values to learn.
Firebug was probably the coolest thing I remember when I was first learning JavaScript and web programming, and to see where the web tooling has now kind of evolved to, like, it pains me and it makes me happy to know that either devs today or devs in the future will never have to learn what it's like to debug with alert. It's like
yes, lots of alert statements too.
No breakpoints. Like, there was those are like days when it's like you just look at code and be like, what am I even doing with my life?
Yeah. Fortunately, being more of an integrations kind of person and more backend, I did avoid the struggles of supporting a lot of different browsers like IE6 and having to do a lot of CSS. In fact, I'm still not really great at CSS, which is, I've managed to hobble through that and have usually work with teammates that are much better at it that can kind of pick up that front. But yeah, I agree. It's definitely a get off my lawn kind of moment to see, as those, and that's any technology too, right? As tooling and other features evolve, you do end up over time becoming that person that kind of shakes their fist at the sky and says, "Oh, if you only knew what I went through."
Not like thinking that you don't know CSS that well. Don't you know, all the cool kids these days actually just use CSS and JavaScript. So you don't even need to know CSS these days. You just have JavaScript and it does everything for you.
Exactly. Yeah. I haven't even honestly gone down that path yet. I've only seen some things with React and other tech, right? That's kind of experimenting with that. So yeah,
that is a dark rabbit hole that most people just don't necessarily need, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it's another thing. It is encouraging to see different experiments like that. And those are much more feasible, possible, and ideas that are easier to spread on the internet now, right? With social media, GitHub, and other, kind of open source tools and things, right? So the collective, having the world's collective mind share unlocked to especially new developers can be overwhelming for sure. But again, it's something even 10 years ago we didn't have.
I remember rummaging through like Stack Overflow posts that were pointing back to like old versions of IE5, and these still weren't like, browsers that were relevant at the time. These were people like posting codes like back when I was working at this one company, we created this little kind of hack to work around issues in IE5, and it sounds like you're still having the same issue. So try out my old IE5 hack. And it's like, but you only got that one result after like hours and hours of searching and rummaging through. And it's like, oh, you can find anything on Stack Overflow these days, and it just happens to work.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was fortunate to only, I think, be, I don't know, not too long into my career as a professional developer when Stack Overflow launched, and I could tell right away that it was a game changer. It was immensely helpful for a new developer for me, especially in a new professional context. I went to a traditional 4-year university and got a computer science degree, but that doesn't, at least for me, did not prepare me for your day-to-day type of developer role, right? There's and I'm curious about your background, Mike, as well, but there's a big difference between learning the fundamental concepts, which are important, and actually day-to-day dev, and especially in a business context. So yeah, Stack Overflow was just a joy, and I was so happy to see that and embrace that.
You were working on hybrid apps for a while. You were working in this kind of PhoneGap Cordova ecosystem. What were some of your first tools that you kind of like messed around with, other than jQuery, which I'm pretty sure that's like everyone's first framework, quote unquote framework. What were some of like the standard kind of like tools that you would go to, and how have you seen that evolve over time? Obviously, code libraries have gotten a lot better, but what about paradigm shifts or like patterns that you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the apps that I even still have on the stores today, just haven't touched them in a while. I kind of fumbled around with different solutions for a while. From the main, but I ended up landing on a few that did work pretty well for essentially creating single page applications, spas, and bundling them into mobile apps. So, there was a lot of jQuery mobile, which had built-in UI controls, which was very helpful. Again, I don't come from a designer kind of background, and CSS, it wasn't, I'm more from doing logic programming, right? Backend type of thing where there's no UI. So, I was probably the first thing I did was look at what in around maybe 2010, 2012 was look for, what are the front end available UI libraries or SDKs that are available. And I kind of standardized on a mix of jQuery mobile and Telerex Kendo UI at the time. They're specifically their Kendo UI mobile tools. And then for packaging that SPA app into a iOS and Android app, and for a little bit of time there before it essentially went away, Windows Phone as well, started using PhoneGap / Cordova, and specifically PhoneGap Build, which is Adobe's tool to that takes your web assets and images and everything, and you upload that to their cloud, and it spits out the native version of the app. So kind of use that for quite a time. And interestingly enough, I remember I never, especially in those early days, I did not hear about Ionic per se. So, but I do remember an interesting time where Angular 1 was coming up, and I thought about making that switch and investing in that, but it looked, to be honest, it looked complicated, and I wanted to focus on delivering new features and actually pushing these apps out. And again, as a side project especially, it's enough work on its own. So I remember now, I used also Knockout.js for data binding, especially, which works really well for CRUD-based apps when you're just updating and manipulating data, much like most software is, right?
So you went through like the knockout path. I went the jQuery mobile, and Backbone option. back in the day because I thought like,
oh, sure.
Backbone, it seems so nice. Everything is just like this completely isolated, concept of a view, and that's why I was like, oh, okay, it kind of wins me over. I had looked at Knockout before, and I was in that same point actually as you, where I was like, okay, I'm doing just jQuery and jQuery mobile code. I feel like this is like 2 or 3 apps in, and I'm like, this is becoming a nightmare to actually manage all this code. And it's like it is a traditional like spaghetti code setup that people like rant about. So it's like, let's look at some different frameworks or some different options out there. And you see, I looked at AngularJS for like a day and a half, and I was like, okay, it didn't click at first, so I went down the Backbone option, and I was like, okay, this is great. But funny enough, it's like you find Angular. I revisited Angular when I was learning Ionic way back before I even joined the company. I was like, oh, well, I guess I have to learn Angular now, and Ionic kind of taught me AngularJS back in the day. So it's like, it's just funny how we all wound up here.
Yeah, and and a quick note on Angular too, especially from the .NET context, because you mentioned traditionally, whether it is .NET folks, or could be other types of server side languages and backend languages. I will say again, especially today, and one of the last teams that I was a part of when I was still doing consulting was our stack was actually Angular 2. And .NET microservices for the back end, and Azure for the cloud services. And, Angular nowadays, and now it's Angular 6, or who knows, could be 11 by tomorrow. Angular with TypeScript, it's a lot more like C# than traditional JavaScript, although newer versions of JavaScript as well have really improved the language from, again, 5-10 years ago. So we had on this one particular team that I was part of for about a year, we had a lot of success with devs that didn't come from any kind of front end background, picking it up and really embracing the web side of things really fast. So that's just one interesting thing that, again, there was this sea change of, it sounds scary when you're used to one front or back end kind of stack, but nowadays it's getting easier to get into this type of thing, right? And become, whether you want to call it a full stack developer, or at least explore it. It's there's a lot more better tooling and resources out there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to tell me years ago, it's like, hey, you could write JavaScript on the back end and you could reuse the same tools, and you could use that debugger that you have inside the browser to debug your backend code. And it's like, I would have called your bluff. And it's like, don't joke around. This is serious business. This is not a laughing matter. Yeah. Don't tell me I can do JavaScript for serious stuff. But it's great to see that the entire ecosystem just constantly moves forward, and there's this whole emphasis on, you can do things with one language, and just kind of, not to kind of like go back to that point, but it's like you can do not just cross-platform in terms of native and the web, but you can do cross like distribution. You can do front end and back end, and even if we want to get into that topic, like embedded like technologies, you can do IoT. Johnny 5 is like a thing. You can do so much with like just knowing a few different technologies, and it's like, oh, this is cool.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And really, I don't know. I've always been someone that believes in picking the right tool for the job, right? And avoiding silly arguments over, the language X or language Y, different toolings and things. Because at the end of the day, as developers, teams, companies, whatever, the idea is always going to be, you're there to provide value, there to solve business problems, and come up with wonderful creative solutions. And the languages behind that and the stacks, they're just tools. They're just tools in your belt, and whatever makes sense for your goals is what you should use. And that was kind of how I got really hyped up and came to become a believer, even long before joining Ionic. in this kind of hybrid path, because I could see that if I can build at the time, and now it's even, like you said, it's beyond mobile apps, right? But at the time it was like, wow, if I can build iOS and Android apps that reach tens of thousands of people or more by myself, there's something there, you know. A lot of folks, I think, dismiss using JavaScript or TypeScript for these types of solutions and things, and for a variety of reasons, and that's fine. But there's often not a lot of, I think, data to back that up, and there's plenty of real examples out there that show that it's possible and quite a valid, strategy. So,
and not just that it's possible or that it's, it's something that you can do. It's people are succeeding with it too, which is always great to know, that it's like, hey, it's not being used, just in anger. It's being used with, very successful companies and very successful apps, and people are, very productive with it, which is just the icing on the cake at that point. It's more the technical side of, can we do this is, has been met, and the kind of business side of things of, can we do this and be successful, has also been met. So it's like you get to check off those two boxes and be like, yes, JavaScript and web technologies can kind of do this.
Right. And, that's a great point, is what you had mentioned when you talked about, when I mentioned Knockout or Backbone, other tools that you kind of a few years ago had to cobble together to create these solutions, is maintainability. So much of software development is not new features and new, necessarily the new exciting fun stuff. It's maintaining and building upon your existing solutions. And as you said yourself, a few years ago with throwing those tools together, even, that's for yourself or for me alone, working alone, that was a nightmare. So imagine that in a team context. And so that's why I think, again, when you talk about Ionic, Angular, TypeScript, or even some of the newer languages and other frameworks that are becoming popular, the creators have thought about teams from the get-go, right? And that's so powerful, because, if you have in the past, and you want to use a single code base to reach different platforms, it really has to be team friendly, because otherwise you're going to end up with a million bugs and other kind of frustrations as you try to move between different browsers, different tech, right?
So this is a very interesting thing, because I was having that same thought process yesterday, actually, after I shut down from work, and I'm just like making dinner, and then I had read something where people were like, oh, it's, all this new code stuff, throw away everything that you've been using before and jump to this project. And I'm just like, it's not just about the code that you have to write today, tomorrow, and then like in a week, and then you can just jump to a new project. It's like, you want the technology that you're going to use to be able to live for a year and a half. It's not going to be like the, super exciting projects that you're going to be working on. It's going to be like these long-lived projects that, you need to make sure that technology is all there. It's going to be well supported. It's going to kind of work in a given time. And knowing that, there are tools out there these days that, like you said, focus on just not, it does this and it integrates with that. It's like, these are tools built for larger teams. They're going to be built for longevity, and they're going to be built for, for lasting power.
Yes, because, whether you're a business that's concerned about hiring the right developers and longevity, or yourself as a professional developer wanting to invest in tools and frameworks that last, that's so important. Because as we mentioned at the very beginning of this, with the concern over learning, iOS development specifically, or Android, or whatever other mobile platform eventually comes up, is career opportunities. That factors into it. And that's one thing that I know I saw early on with web technologies in general, is you could, being at over 20 years of browsers and seeing the positive direction it's going, you are almost guaranteed that there's going to be opportunity and more investment and evolving of the web as a platform, so I'm yes.
Cool. So, I mean, we've kind of talked about where you come from, what kind of background and what kind of apps you have built and how you found hybrid. I do want to touch on one point, and that is with you joining Ionic now, it's like, what other than just like the technical or like the the requirements of like, oh, we want someone who can do technical writing, who can do all this, who's good at DevRel, and other than those side of things, what is it about it that that made you want to join? And also, like, what do you think you can add to it? Because if there's not just oh, I feel like it'd be a good fit. It's like, what can you improve and what can you add that would create value?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like I'm back in my interview experience all over again.
Oh, I don't worry. This is going to be nothing but interviews for everybody in the future.
I feel like this is a trap. No,
it's a trap.
No, that's an awesome question. Well, as I kind of hinted at it, while I hadn't used Ionic myself with my apps, I was starting to look towards them and had been following the company's blog, especially for at least a couple of years prior to this, and had I think mainly through the blog and Twitter, and probably some of your presentations too, Mike, and others at the company, came to really want to keep tabs on how Ionic was doing. And really what happened is I had been, again, doing my thing in my corner with Cordova and this tech stack I talked about, and loving the hybrid approach. But, the reality of, the reality of it is it's sometimes still difficult for others to wrap their heads around and sell others on the benefits of it, because the default that everyone's going to assume for mobile development is the native approach, learning iOS and Android specific languages. So when something like this role came up at Ionic, I was immediately interested because I believe in web technologies and had been a fan of what Ionic's been doing for many years, right? And the thought of being able to dedicate my time beyond just side projects, occasional blogs, tweets, whatever, and talks was super appealing. Really being able to make a difference there and promote it, was incredibly appealing. So what I'm hoping to, as you said, it does it. The other aspect too is having gotten a little taste of being a little entrepreneurial with creating, developing, designing, marketing and offering support for my apps and owning that entire experience was so much fun and gave me such a broader perspective on what's involved with a successful software product, right? And so what I was kind of hoping to do is go keep, always stay technical, because I'll always love software development and everything to do with software and computers and all that. But I love more and more I've been getting into just learning so much about marketing, product marketing and things like that, and being able to come in here where we're a small company and every single person has an impact here was huge for me, for sure. And being able to drive and give, researched and different kinds of opinions and, really bring my passion to the space was something that was absolutely a no-brainer for me. So
awesome. Cool. So yeah. I think at this point we should close it up. Matt, thank you for joining. If people wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing that?
Sure. Probably the best area to reach me is over Twitter. I am, we'll put that in the show notes. I am at .netco on Twitter, which is kind of a funny throwback that someone came up for me. My last name is Netko. And having come years ago when I was starting with, again, .NET Technologies, someone gave me the moniker .netco. And I thought that was hilarious. So
when I saw your Twitter handle, I was like, I bet you he did .NET back in the day.
Yeah, so no surprise there, right? It still fits.
The joke was not lost on me. Thank you so much for joining. We will be back with another awesome podcast in the future. And thank you for joining.
Thank you very much.